Hey everyone, welcome to another weekly art video. I hope you're having an amazing day and thanks so much for joining me on this one. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be taking you through my full sketching process for this toned paper value study. I'm going to be working with Prismacolor colored pencils today, and I'm going to be taking you through my process for how I select my colors and how I use a 5 value or tone scale to create a range of values in this object study and create depth on the page. Toned paper can be such an incredible substrate to draw and sketch on when we're trying to improve our art skills. It provides an awesome opportunity for us to continue developing our ability to pinpoint different value areas or tones in our reference photo or whatever it is that we have in front of us in real life in order to make those values or tones happen in our drawing, which, as I've mentioned previously, value or tone is ultimately what matters most when we're trying to get better at developing a sense of realism in our work. And though we can certainly improve our skill to pinpoint different values in a reference photo or whatever it is that we have in front of us in real life, in order to recreate them in a drawing on any kind of paper, whether it's white, toned, or black paper, or any other color. Working on toned paper can be very helpful because you're starting with a mid-tone base. I'll talk more about this and how drawing on toned paper is different from drawing on white paper or black paper in just a bit. But first, let me just briefly talk about the supplies that you're going to see me use today. I'm going to be working in this Tone Tanned sketchbook from Strathmore. This is a relatively small sketchbook. It's 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches. I'm going to be using one of these drawing pencils from Faber-Castell, and it's going to be a B grade. I also have a couple of different erasers on hand. One of them is a regular soft eraser, and the other one is a kneaded eraser. And finally, I also have my Prismacolor Premier colored pencil set. And because this study is going to be completely monochromatic, I'm only going to be using black, white, and a couple of different grays. I wanted to keep this one as simple as possible, make sure to focus on the main ideas behind using toned paper, and explain the overall method so that this can be beginner friendly and I can provide a nice kind of jump off point for you if you're just getting started with toned paper. Alright, so here is this great reference photo of an orange that I found via unsplash.com. It was taken by photographer May Moo. I'm going to make sure to leave a link where you can download this reference photo down below in the description box of this video. And this is a great photo for a study because I'm very easily able to tell lightest areas, mid-tone areas, and darkest shadow areas. And I always recommend taking a moment to observe that reference photo and ask yourself where the light source is in relation to this object. In this case, I can see highlight areas and central light areas are on the left and very close to the left edge of this object. And the cast shadow areas are opposite to this, below the orange and to the right. So this tells me that the light source is hitting this object from the left. I can see some lighter values opposite to this, but this looks more to me like reflected light. Even at this point, start noticing lightest areas, mid-tone areas, and darkest areas. And I'm actually going to be working with a grayscale or desaturated version of this photo. I opened up the reference photo in Photoshop, turned it into a grayscale photo, and that's what I'm going to be working with because I know that working with a grayscale photo is going to facilitate the process of pinpointing different value areas, lights, midtones, and darks so that I can make them happen in my sketch. Why? Because turning a full color photo into a black and white photo synthesizes and creates one single value scale for you to work with instead of seeing this multitude of values for all of these different colors. So this is something that I highly recommend doing if you're just getting started with developing different values in your artwork, or if you're looking to work on value studies before starting a new piece. All right, so with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with the first phase of this process, which is going to be, of course, to create our preliminary outline sketch. If shapes and proportions don't look good in our preliminary outline sketch, then no amount of shading or detail is going to make this look realistic. So I highly recommend taking your time with this preliminary outline sketch and really observing that reference photo in order to make sure that shapes and proportions look good before moving forward. Because we're sketching an organic, natural object here, it's a lot easier to arrive at a believable sketch and to recreate those proportions and shapes than, say, if you were drawing something like a face or an animal, or you're drawing something like a house or a building and you have to make sure the perspective looks right. When it comes to drawing organic natural objects, there is more of a margin of error because your orange itself, the stem, the leaves, they can be slightly wider, taller, the shape can be slightly different, and you're likely still gonna arrive at believable results. So just like what I always share with all of my drawing or sketching tutorials, which I'll make sure to leave links to a few of them down below in the text section of this post, where I delve deeper into the must-know freehand sketching tips for beginners. I always start with my general largest shapes and make my way towards specifics, and I simplify everything as much as possible, really paying attention to how the different parts making up the whole of this image relate with each other in terms of width, height, location, angles created, etc. And I just try to get that in to the best of my abilities. I do end up changing the shape of the curl of the leaf a little bit. I like more how it looks this way, even though I most often than not use a reference photo or something that I have in front of me in real life when I'm creating a drawing or a painting. I bring in my artistic license whenever I feel that the piece will look better, especially when it comes to the secondary or supportive elements in the piece. I just make sure to bring in my understanding of light behavior when it comes time to do my shading, so that this section that I am partially creating from imagination still looks believable. It's also very important for me to draw lightly so that I can easily erase mistakes and refine my drawing, and also not scratch or damage my paper. I don't want too much of my pencil showing through the work that I'm going to be doing next with colored pencil, so it's very important to draw as light as possible. And once I'm happy with my freehand sketch, I go ahead and tap my kneaded eraser over my sketch to lighten it a little bit more. Now that our sketch is finished, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about how we're going to be using these colored pencils on this toned paper. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to be using 5 different values to shade in and create some subtle textures in this piece of fruit. So knowing that I would be using 5 different values, I went ahead and picked 4 colors that I thought would be helpful from my Prismacolor set. 2 of those colors are easy to choose or prepare, which are the black and the white. We're going to be using white in the brightest highlight areas, so that is going to be our lightest value, value number 1, and then we're going to be using the black for our darkest value areas. That's going to be value number 5. Value number 3, which is our base midtone, is going to be represented by the paper itself, because as I said, when we're drawing on toned paper, we're starting with a mid-tone substrate, a mid-tone surface. So there's no need to cover up that paper in those mid-tone sections. We can incorporate that paper into our drawing as part of the mid-tones. And this is awesome because it really speeds up that shading process. However, we still need our 2 colors for value number 2 and value number 4. And this is why I took a little bit longer to pre-select the 2 grays that I would be using to shade in these value areas. To keep it really simple, let's just see value number 2 as being lighter midtones. Let's see value 3 as being the base midtones, and let's see value number 4 as being darker midtones. For this exercise, I would highly recommend just working with grays. For value number 2 areas, simply look for a gray that is darker than value 1, which is easy because everything is darker than white, but lighter than your paper. For value number 4, look for a gray that is lighter than black, which is going to be easy because there's nothing darker than black, but make sure that it is darker than your paper. I would highly recommend swatching out your colors the way that I'm doing right here on screen for you, and you'll know that you've selected a good range of colors if when you see your swatches, you see a nice gradual transition going from lights to darks when you see value 1 to value 5. All right, before getting into the shading process, I just want to provide a couple of quick tips for you that are going to help you be more successful with your exercise. Key tip number 1 is pay attention to the pressure that you're exerting on your pencil. Because we want to incorporate the paper as part of the piece, especially for our base midtone areas or areas with value number 3, we want to make sure that the application of color as we're getting into those areas gets lighter and lighter in order to create soft transitions. This means that some amount of paper will be shining through even in sections with value number 2 and value number 4. All this means really is that when I am using my lighter gray and my darker gray, I'm really not exerting much pressure on my paper at all. I am leaving that paper shining through in certain sections and making sure to apply these colors lightly. This is going to make it so that the transitions between these midtone areas are gradual. I don't have sharp edges between value number 4 areas and value number 3 areas, or value number 2 areas and value number 3 areas. Whereas when I use my white and my black, especially near the end of the sketching process, I am applying those a little bit more heavily because it is my intention to cover up those areas of my paper a little bit more. I would recommend doing some quick warm-up drills, very similar to what I have done here at the bottom of this page, where you use your 2 grays to create gradients. So you can see how right here I have done some quick practice work where I have used my light gray with a heavier application up at the top, and I am releasing that pressure as I make my way down. Notice how at the top of these gradients I've covered up more paper with a heavier application of these grays, and then as I make my way down and loosen up that pressure, there is more paper left shining through. These kinds of exercises are excellent in helping you develop your control over your drawing tools so that you can make mindful use of pressure as you're moving along in your drawing process. Always remember, the more pressure you exert, the more paper you're going to cover. The less pressure you exert, the less paper you're going to cover. Last tip for success before getting into the shading process here. So I talked about how important it is to create gradual transitions. So in order for that to happen, make sure that the color that you have in your hand makes sense with the value that you're trying to develop in your drawing, and make sure that you're paying attention to the pressure that you're exerting on your pencil. This next note is on layering your colors. When you're working on your midtones, it's okay, and it is to be expected that you're going to be doing some overlapping between them, especially when you're working on creating softer transitions and you're nearing the last stages of the drawing process where you're really pushing areas a little bit more or lightening areas a little bit more. That's to be expected. But when you're using your white and your black, you want to be very careful to only use those colors in either the highlight areas or the darkest dark areas. You don't want to use the white on top of the black or the black on top of the white. That is going to be very stark to look at, very distracting, because there is going to be a very sharp transition between the 2 colors or the 2 values there. Aside from this, if you try to do layering and blending with white on top of the black or black on top of the white, you're likely going to arrive at a chalky or milky effect when you really want your brightest highlight areas to be clean and your darkest dark areas to be clean. So when it comes to the black and the white, you want to keep them separate. You can see this milky, kind of muddy effect that I've created on my paper here, where I've done some overlapping of black over white or white over black. That's not something that I'm looking for in my drawing. I can, however, overlap some of my light gray over my white, or overlap some of my dark gray over my black with no issue. The issue is when you combine or start mixing together the white and the black. Think about how you can always take a step forward towards the darker values a step at a time, but also if you need to lighten something, think of the previous color, the previous value that you've prepared for yourself, and go with that. All right, so what's the difference between drawing on toned paper versus drawing on white paper or drawing on black paper? As I was explaining, when you're drawing on toned paper, you're starting with a medium value. You're starting with a midtone, which means that in order to develop that range of values that you need to develop as an artist in order to communicate depth and 3D-ness on a flat two-dimensional surface like a piece of paper or canvas or wall, you need to develop lighter values and you need to develop darker values. But if you want to, instead of covering up the page, you can incorporate those midtones that are already there for you as part of the piece. Whereas when you start on white paper, you start with the lightest value and you develop the darker values, the midtones and the darkest darks. And you can leave that white paper shining through in lightest value areas. Opposite to this, when you work on black paper, the substrate already provides the darkest values for you. So what you do to develop that range of values is create the midtones and the lightest lights. And you can leave your black paper shining through in darkest value areas. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our shading process. I'm gonna be walking you through the way that I feel is the simplest way to do this. And we're first gonna get started with our light gray, meaning the color that you chose for value number 2. I made sure that this light gray was pretty well sharpened. And what I am doing right here is I am going in with circular motions, a circular stroke. And very lightly, I am going over the entire orange area of this fruit. My intention here is to simply start laying down some pigment on paper while allowing plenty of that toned paper to be left shining through these circular marks or strokes that I am creating. Because this is the color that is closest to the color of my paper, I am applying it a little bit more freely, going over the entire thing very loosely, already starting to incorporate that toned paper as part of the piece, and getting some of this pigment on my paper so that I can then move on to doing my layering in darkest value areas. So I'm going in lightly and loosely, with barely any pressure at all. And once I am done with this orange area, I'm gonna be moving on to adding that first layer the same way in the cast shadow below the orange and also in the stem and the leaf. However, when I create this layer in the shadow area and the stem and the leaf, I am using more back and forth strokes because as I am going in and starting to develop my color and my values, I also have the texture that I'm trying to describe in mind. And I shift and change the way that I am using my drawing tool so that I can start describing those textures at the same time. All right, so with that first layer in, I am now switching to my darker midtone. So this is the darker gray that I am using for value number 4 areas. And what I am doing at this point is I am focusing on the darker areas in that reference photo and starting to do layering only in those areas. I am still going in with circular motions inside of the orange section of the fruit, and I am not exerting very much pressure at all on my pencil or my paper. I am going in very gently and very patiently and making my way incrementally towards the darkest darks. So I'm observing my reference photo and noticing where darker midtone areas are, and I'm leaving lighter value areas completely uncovered with this next layer of pigment, leaving just the previous lighter gray and the paper to be left alone and shining through in lighter value areas. With this darker gray that I am using right now, you can see how my circular strokes that I am using inside of the skin of the orange are quite loose. And this looseness, when I am creating all of these loops, allows for more of that paper to be left shining through. If I were using tighter circles, I would be covering much more of that paper. So these looser circles not only help me start incorporating that paper as part of the piece, but they also help me start describing this rough texture in the skin of the orange. Whereas in other parts of this piece, like for example the leaf has much more of a smoother texture. So I can use more back and forth motions or tighter circles in order to arrive at a smoother texture. And depending on the value that you're trying to create in that area, you cover up the page more or less. The leaf, for example, is almost all darker values. So I went in with this darker gray, and you can see how I covered up more than what I did for the orange itself, because there are lighter values in the orange. With my dark gray in my hand, I am still going in and doing more layering in darker midtone areas and also darkest dark areas that I'm later going to be doing even more layering in with my black. And at this point, you can even tell how I have certain darker sections that I've developed with this darker gray that I have done more layering in, and /or that I've exerted a little bit more pressure in order to cover up even more of my paper. These are very, very dark areas that I'm able to see in that reference photo that I'm later going to be applying black in. So it's all about preparing that area where I'm going to be placing the black in, so that I don't go in with the black on a very light colored background, which is going to create a lot of contrast and is going to be very stark looking. So as I said, it's about taking things incrementally, a step at a time, towards your darker values. And with your dark gray, as you make your way towards the lighter values, make sure that you're exerting less and less pressure on your pencil so that you can create a natural looking gradient, a transition. All right, so I'm almost done with my darker gray, and before jumping to my white, I'm gonna be bringing in my lighter gray again, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of quick layering with this lighter gray in lighter midtone sections that I maybe covered up a little bit too much with my gray. This is with the intention of just lightening up those areas a little bit more. Another way to fix these areas that you've maybe applied too much of your darker gray in that are actually lighter value areas or lighter midtone areas is you can certainly go in with a soft eraser and erase out some of that excess pigment that you've laid down on your paper. You're certainly going to be able to erase some of that back up as long as your applications have been light and you haven't been doing way too much layering. Make sure that if you are going in with a soft eraser, that eraser is clean so that you don't dirty up your drawing. All right, so I'm finally ready to bring in my white. At this point in the drawing process, you can already see lighter midtone areas where plenty of that paper is shining through, and /or where I've applied that lighter gray, and then darker midtone areas where I've applied my darker gray. And even within those darker gray values, I've already created a little bit of a range, because in some areas I've applied that dark gray a little bit more heavily, and in other areas I've applied that darker gray with less pressure and less overlapping. It is now time to start amplifying that range of values even more and start creating lighter values, lighter tones. So I'm finally bringing in my white, which is value number 1. And as I said in the tips section before getting started, you can certainly feel free to apply a little bit more pressure and do a little bit more heavy layering with your white, especially in lightest, brightest value areas that you're able to see in that reference photo. I'm still going in with a circular motion, circular strokes, especially in the rough skin of the orange to continue enhancing this rougher texture. But whenever I'm going to be adding highlights to sections of the leaf or the stem, I'm going in with shorter back and forth motions. After having added in some highlights in the rough skin of the orange, I am now adding in highlights, especially in some sections along the left edge of the stem, because remember that the light source is hitting this object from the left, and there are very few very light values in the leaf itself. All right, so after having done some work with that white, I switched on back to my lighter gray. And what I'm doing here is I am working on softening transitions between my lightest, brightest highlight areas that I've just started developing with my white and the midtones. I'm not doing this around every single highlight shape that I've developed, just a few here and there to soften some transitions. All right, so right here, I am switching on back to my darker gray, and I'm gonna be pushing darker value areas a little bit more and working on those transitions where the darker values turn into the lighter values, exerting less and less pressure as I make my way out of darker value areas. I want to make sure that I'm happy with the range of values that I've developed before I bring in my black. So I'm continuing to work on the darker midtones, applying more of this darker gray in my darkest areas that I'm going to be developing and I'm going to be going in with next with my black. With this darker gray, I am also enhancing that texture of the rough skin a little bit more. I observe that reference photo and observe those sections that I want to darken a little bit more in the orange skin, and make sure to go in with those circular motions that are going to help me darken that area a little bit more. And I'm also simultaneously continuing to enhance this texture. I'm not exerting very much pressure at all on my paper, maybe a teeny tiny bit more in certain sections, but I am not trying to burnish sections or make sections super smooth. I want a sketchier look to this one. And this is important. You don't want to start just continuing to layer and layer and layer color and lose track of what we're doing here, because we're trying to bring in the tone paper as part of the piece. Remember to save those mid-tone areas as much as possible. This is really an exercise in incorporating the paper as part of the piece. Even though we're trying to develop a wide range of values to bring in a certain level of depth and 3D-ness to the page, we're not really going for hyper-realism here. This is still a quick study, a quick exploration. All right, so I have now developed a wide range of values, from very light lights to a wide range of midtones to pretty dark midtone areas, and I am now ready to bring in my darkest color, which is my black. And with my black, I really want to focus on only doing overlapping in darkest value areas that I can see in that reference photo, nowhere else. With this darkest color, I can press down a little bit more, but I also want to make sure that I'm exerting less and less pressure as I make my way out of darkest areas. This is so that I can create a soft, gradual transition between my darkest dark areas and my darker midtone areas that have that dark gray in them. It's very easy to start creating very stark looking or very distracting lines, marks, or even shapes when you have such a dark color in your hand. So be careful, make sure that you're staying away from the look of heavy outlines and things like that that are going to retract from the level of realism of your work. Make sure that you're only applying your black in areas that are really, really dark, where you really require that. All right, so after having done some of my work with my black, I switched on back to my darker gray. And with this darker gray in hand, I am working on transitions between my black and my darker gray midtone areas. I'm also taking this opportunity to perhaps describe that texture in the orange skin a little bit more with those circular strokes. And anywhere that I feel I perhaps need to darken a little bit more, that are kind of darker midtone areas or sections of edges that I want to push the contrast in a little bit more, I go in to darken with this dark gray. Throughout the next part of the process, I am really going back and forth between my different colors, working on transitions, pushing texture a little bit more, making certain sections a little bit darker or a little bit lighter, while continuing to observe that reference photo and noticing areas that I perhaps need to work on a little bit more. As I am doing all of this, I am continuing to make sure that I'm not mindlessly starting to just layer color and covering up sections of midtones that I don't need to cover up. Really making sure that I'm understanding the value that I'm trying to develop in that area, and that the colored pencil that I have in my hand goes in accordance with that value that I'm trying to develop. As you're moving forward with any layering that might be taking place, remember the colors that you can layer on top of each other. Try not to do layering of black, for example, over sections where you only have your white or light gray. And make sure that you're not doing layering of white over black. You can see how I am continuing to jump around the entire piece, and I am working quite loosely. Even though I am observing that reference photo, and I'm definitely using that visual information present in the reference photo to help me create a level of realism that I want, I'm still keeping it loose, keeping it flowing, really keeping in mind that less is more, and not being overly perfectionistic about making every single thing exactly the same as it appears in that reference photo. As long as the major value areas make sense and they are similar to what I am seeing in that reference photo, so that I can describe this 3D structure of this object, this study will be successful. Okay, doing some pushing of highlight sections with my white here, then working on transitions between darkest shadow areas and the lighter shadow areas using my dark gray. And I am going to be moving on to adding a little bit of a tone or value in the background behind this object. This is 100% optional. If you like how your piece looks the way it is, then by all means leave it as is. I just want to darken certain sections of this background, especially to make the lighter edges of the orange pop. So all I am doing here is I'm going in with my darker gray and I am starting to do gentle back and forth motions in certain sections of the background with longer back and forth strokes, back and forth motions. And because I am trying to cover up that paper a little bit more uniformly, I am making sure that these strokes are very close to each other or even overlapping these strokes in certain areas to cover up more of that paper. But you can see how I am not going in with very much pressure at all so that I can keep this gray relatively light and relatively close to the midtone offered by the paper itself. A little trick that I like doing after having darkened some sections of my background is going in with my soft eraser and running my eraser over the edges of these very irregular shapes that I've developed to soften those edges a little bit more, to create a softer transition between this new gray value that I've developed in the background and the paper itself. All right, so very last thing here after having done that work in the background is I'm gonna do final refinements in my drawing here, perhaps pushing those very darkest areas a tiny bit more with my black, going in and softening transitions with either of my grays, enhancing that texture. Whatever I feel I might need to work on a little bit more, I go ahead and do that at this point. Make sure, once again, that the color that you have in your hand is right for what you're trying to do. Also, remember that in realism, there are no outlines. What we're trying to develop are edges. So if you feel the need to go in and trace along all of the outer edges of the leaf and the stem and the orange here, because you feel things are getting a little bit lost in between, what you need to do instead of going in and creating outlines is defining edges. How do you do this? By either darkening or lightening inside of that area or outside of that area, not separating out the two areas with a line in between them. This is something that a lot of us feel compelled to do when we're just getting started, but this doesn't happen in real life. This is key to any level of realism that you might want to create. So if you notice in my drawing, there are no outlines present. There are certain sections of my edges of all of these different elements that are darker, and there are other sections of these edges that are lighter. Edges that are being hit by the light source directly or maybe have a little bit of a reflected light on them are lighter, whereas edges that are in shadow are darker. In certain areas, these edges get lost with the background or the section next to it because the values inside of that shape or area are the same as the values outside of that shape or area, so that edge becomes lost. Whereas in other areas, you can tell those edges apart because the value inside of that shape is different from the value outside of the shape. In many areas, that difference is subtle, and in other areas, that difference is more visible. And this happens in realism. All right, you guys, that is gonna do it for today's video. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you found it helpful. And if you did, pretty please make sure to give this video a thumbs up because it really helps support the work that I am doing here on YouTube and helps others get to know about my channel. Thank you so much for watching today. Don't forget to subscribe and click on that little bell so that you can be notified of when I share my new videos, which happens every single week. Have a beautiful rest of the day and see you soon. Bye guys!